At 11:47 last night, the lights were still on in a private Senate office when 4 Republican senators walked in one by one. No staff, no cameras, phones left outside the door. And when they walked out 37 minutes later, Washington wasn't the same, even if most Americans had no idea yet. Because what happened inside that room wasn't about speeches, headlines, or party talking points. It was about survival. Political survival, legal survival, and possibly the survival of a presidency that suddenly looks far less untouchable than it did just days ago. This didn't come out of nowhere. For a full week, pressure had been building behind the scenes. Election losses, donor panic, business backlash, legal deadlines stacking up, one crack after another in what used to look like an unbreakable wall of party loyalty. And then, because when power starts shifting in private before it collapses in public, history tends to move fast. Let's talk about the week that led to that door closing and why the people inside may have just started a countdown no one can stop. Why our can stop? It started with a result that sent a quiet shockwave through political circles. A race that party leaders had poured attention into, a contest they treated like a must-win signal heading into the next election cycle, and the outcome wasn't close. The candidate, backed by some of the biggest names in conservative politics, didn't just lose, they were beaten decisively. On the surface, it looked like just another state-level defeat. But insiders didn't see it that way. This was a battleground environment, the kind of place that usually mirrors national energy. And the numbers coming out of that race didn't show enthusiasm. They showed erosion. That loss triggered something more serious than public frustration. It sparked private panic because internal data had already been warning about fatigue among swing voters, people who once leaned right but were growing tired of constant political chaos. Then came the Senate vote. Not symbolic, not procedural theater, a real break from party leadership on a major economic power. And the part that rattled Washington wasn't just the vote itself. It was that public pressure beforehand didn't work. Direct appeals, criticism, even threats of political consequences failed to move them. They voted against the line anyway. That's when strategists started whispering a word they hadn't used in years: defiance. Because in politics, once fear stops working, control starts slipping. And that realization set off a chain reaction that would lead straight to that late-night meeting. The real alarm bells didn't ring on television. They rang in private phone calls and closed-door donor briefings. Because while voters send signals through elections, money sends signals through silence. Major contributors who usually move early and confidently reportedly started hesitating. Fundraising events slowed. Calls that used to be returned in minutes stretched into days. Corporate voices that prefer to stay neutral began expressing frustration about economic uncertainty, trade instability, and market volatility. Not publicly, not yet, but directly to party leadership. And here's why that mattered. Campaigns don't just run on enthusiasm. They run on logistics, ads, staffing, legal teams, data operations. When funding confidence dips, strategy shifts from expansion to defense, from winning new ground to... At the same time, private polling painted a more complicated picture than the one seen in public debates. Core supporters were still loud, still loyal, but independents, the voters who decide close elections, were showing signs of burnout. Words like exhausted, over it, and constant drama kept surfacing in focus groups. That combination is what terrifies party strategists. A fired-up base paired with a drifting middle doesn't equal victory, it equals risk. And when donors start asking whether a candidate is becoming a liability instead of an asset, the conversation inside the party changes tone fast, because that's the moment politics stops being about loyalty and starts being about survival math. And that math is exactly what walked into McConnell's office at 11:47 p.m. By the time that message went out, the day's noise had faded, reporters had gone home, hallways were quiet. That's exactly why the timing mattered. They didn't arrive together. That would have drawn attention. Different routes, different moments, just another late night in Washington, at least on the surface. Inside the office, the tone reportedly skipped small talk entirely. No political theater, no speeches, just numbers, timelines, and consequences. The kind of conversation people have when the situation moves from uncomfortable to unsustainable. What made this different wasn't anger. It was calculation, private polling trends, donor pullback, legal calendars, economic backlash. Each issue alone could be managed. Together, they form something harder to ignore: convergence, multiple pressure points closing in at the same time. And the question on the table wasn't, is this fair or is this loyal? It was simpler, colder. Can the party survive this trajectory? Because political loyalty runs deep until it collides with electoral math. And once elected officials start believing their own futures are tied to someone else's legal and economic risks, the conversation shifts from defense to contingency planning. According to political insiders, that's when the phrase narrow window entered the discussion. A limited stretch of time before events moved beyond anyone's control. 37 minutes later, they left the same way they came, quiet, separate, no statements. But the gravity of that meeting didn't stay in that room. It followed them out into a Capitol that by morning would feel very different. The people in that room weren't random. Each one represents a different fracture line inside the party, and together they form something far more powerful than a typical political bloc. Start with the strategist, a figure known for long games, procedural mastery, and thinking in decades, not headlines. Someone who has defended party power through multiple political storms. When a person like that shifts posture, it's rarely emotional. It's usually because the numbers no longer add up the way they used to. Then there's the swing state realist, a senator who survives by reading the mood of voters who don't live on political extremes. In places like that, national drama hits differently. Local industries, trade relationships, and economic stability matter more than party feuds. When pressure from home grows louder than pressure from leadership, priorities change. Next is that kind of political scar tissue changes how much influence party threats actually hold. Once you've proven you can win without full backing from the machine, fear loses its grip. And finally, the ideological purist, a lawmaker whose brand isn't personality-driven, but principle-driven. When policy starts clashing with the philosophy they've built a career on, silence becomes harder to justify, especially when economic arguments start sounding like contradictions. Different states, different styles, different motivations. But they all arrived at the same place at the same time, the belief that the current path may carry more risk than resistance does. And when politicians with nothing in common start reaching the same conclusion independently, that's when Washington starts paying attention. Because that kind of alignment doesn't happen often. And the fight that pushed everything closer to the edge wasn't about personality. It was about policy and money. Trade decisions that were pitched as strength started being framed differently by critics inside the party, not as leverage, not as strategy, but as costs that ripple through supply chains, small businesses, and household budgets. The argument gaining traction behind closed doors was simple. When prices rise, voters don't blame foreign governments. They blame whoever's in charge. That's where the ideological fault line opened. For decades, many in the party built their identity around one message: lower taxes, lighter economic burdens, government staying out of the way. But now business leaders and market voices were saying the current approach felt like the opposite. More pressure, more uncertainty, more disruption. And the silence from traditional anti-tax power brokers didn't go unnoticed. The people who once sounded alarms over even minor increases weren't leading the charge now. That gap created a perception problem, and perception in politics can spread faster than facts. Inside strategy meetings, a dangerous phrase reportedly started popping up: message conflict. When what you say you stand for doesn't line up with what voters feel in their wallets, trust erodes, not loudly, quietly, gradually. That quiet erosion worried senators facing re-election maps that already look tough. Because defending policy is one thing, defending higher costs to frustrated voters is another. And while that economic argument kept building, another clock was ticking in the background, one that runs on court dates, not campaign stops. Politics runs on cycles. Courts run on calendars. And those two systems were suddenly on a collision course. While campaign strategies were being mapped out months in advance, legal proceedings moved on their own schedule. Court appearances, filing deadlines, pretrial motions, each date circled on a calendar that didn't care about rallies or messaging plans. For senators looking ahead to the next election cycle, that created a different kind of uncertainty. Not just political risk, unpredictability. Trials generate headlines. Testimony generates sound bites. Legal drama has a way of dominating news cycles in ways campaigns can't control. And that loss of control is what unsettles political professionals the most, because campaigns are built around narrative discipline, message of the day, weekly focus, carefully timed announcements. That's when conversations inside the party reportedly shifted tone again. The question stopped being, can we defend this, and became, can we manage the timing of this? Some senators began calculating a scenario where the campaign trail and the courtroom ran side by side, and whether voters in swing states would tune out or tune in for the wrong reasons. When elected officials start weighing not just loyalty but exposure, the risk equation changes fast. And just as those legal clocks kept ticking, the public reaction began escalating in a way that raised the temperature even further. The reaction didn't come quietly. It came fast, loud, and personal. Within hours, statements and posts started flying. Accusations of betrayal, claims of disloyalty, warnings about political consequences. Names were named. Lines were drawn. The message was clear. Anyone stepping out of formation would be treated as an opponent, not an ally. But something else stood out to observers: the tone. Less strategic, more emotional, less persuasion, more pressure. And when rhetoric shifts that way, it can energize supporters while simultaneously pushing fence-sitters further away. Security officials were reportedly watching the temperature closely, not because disagreement is unusual in politics, but because moments of internal party conflict mixed with charged public messaging can create unpredictable. Inside the party, that escalation created another dilemma. The louder the confrontation became, the harder it was for lawmakers to quietly recalibrate. Silence starts to look like alignment. Speaking up starts to look like rebellion. The middle ground shrinks. And that's how political situations move from manageable dispute to defining moment. Because once the conflict is personal, public, and constant, backing down becomes harder for everyone involved, which leaves only one question hanging over Washington. Does this cool off, freeze in place, or explode into a full party fracture? Now, the party faces three paths, and each one carries consequences that could reshape the political landscape. Option one, de-escalation. The president could step back, temper rhetoric, reverse controversial policies, and retreat from the brink. The storm passes and life goes on for now. But insiders say the probability of that happening is low. Option two, stalemate. The party hesitates, talks circulate, and nothing changes publicly. The status quo remains while frustration simmers below the surface. Some see this as the safest route, but it leaves risks unresolved, waiting to erupt later. Option three, rupture. Articles of impeachment filed, legal battles intertwined with political maneuvering, party factions openly divided, and the countdown clock ticking through every day and every. This isn't just about one leader or one election. It's about whether institutions, courts, Congress, party systems can enforce limits on power when pressure builds from all directions: voters, donors, courts, and lawmakers themselves. Because the next move won't just be political, it will be historical, and the world is watching, even if it doesn't yet realize it. In the next 72 hours, everything could change, and when history asks who acted and who hesitated, the answer will be written in the decisions made behind closed doors, the quiet strategies, and the private calculations that never reach the public eye. This is the moment where loyalty meets consequence, strategy meets survival, and democracy is tested, and it all started with one late-night meeting. Right now, Washington is in what insiders call the watch phase. No dramatic speeches on the Senate floor, no official announcements, just quiet conversations, vote counts being checked and rechecked, and political figures choosing every word carefully. Because once a line is crossed publicly, there's no walking it back. Behind the scenes, allies are making calls, opponents are making calls, donors, legal teams, party strategists, everyone is trying to read the same question at the same time. Is this real, or is this pressure meant to force a retreat? That uncertainty is powerful. Markets react to it. Campaigns freeze because of it. Lawmakers hesitate under it. When the future of leadership is unclear, decisions across the system slow down. And here's what makes this moment different from past political crises. Usually the drama is loud first and serious later. This time, the serious part started quietly in offices, meetings, private data briefings, and the public noise followed after. That reversal is why people inside the system are taking it seriously. Because when power starts shifting in private before it collapses in public, events tend to accelerate fast. A single announcement, a filing, a leadership statement, any one move could trigger a chain reaction. Right now, everyone is waiting to see who moves first. And history shows that in moments like this, hesitation can be just as consequential as action. The next step won't just shape one presidency, it will signal how much control political parties actually have over their own leaders when pressure reaches critical mass. And that answer is coming soon.